everybody, and welcome to Fashion Unfolded. My name is Katie.
My name is Cameron.
And this is the podcast where we like to jump into all the nuances of fashion, typically from like a fashion studies academic lens. But today, we just want to have a bit of like a gossip session about the Olympics. I think we're both just here to have a little bit of fun right now because, as we say, fashion is frivolous from time to time. So,
Yeah.
Cameron, you're the pop culture guy here. You want to take it away and just jump right into this episode?
Of course. The Olympics are just such a wonderful time of the year, of every 4 years. It's really fascinating because, there's so many folks, myself included, that, throughout 3.5, 3 3/4 years, deeply anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, holding America to account. But, oh boy, during these months, I am peak nationalist. It's Make America Great Again. I'm on the MAGA team all of a sudden. It is just, I'm so American in these moments. It's wonderful because my family's also from Jamaica, and so I'm rooting for anybody Caribbean, anybody Black, really. And so it's just a really wonderful time of the year, especially from a pop culture perspective. There's so much going on. It's so fun.
There really is.
Yeah.
And I share similar sentiments about my feelings towards our country, but for me, it's like specifically Simone Biles. When I see her out on that gymnastics floor, like every ounce of patriotism comes like flying back to my body.
Oh yeah, immediately. And there's just something like really wonderful about like watching American excellence, but by people that are not necessarily presumed to be the like quintessential American ideal, especially for me, where I'm like, oh yeah, Simone Biles, especially around the mental health stuff. Like there's so much great there. And from a fashion perspective, there's so much. It's been so fun to see all of these different things that we'll get into as we go on to this, but so many wonderful moments in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the podcast where we just chat about fashion. So, Cameron, like, what about the Olympics and fashion do you want to like? What do we start with? Because I feel like there is so much.
There is so much, and I think there's something that I find really interesting about this moment in particular with fashion and the Olympics, fashion and sports in general. Like a lot of my interests are the intersection of fashion and football, and so this is being recorded shortly after the U.S. women's team won the gold medal, which
Yay!
What a wonderful collection of folks there. But just thinking about this kind of inflection point that we're at with fashion and sports in general, right? Like we're at a moment right now where like think about like bloke core as a trend a few years ago that never really ended, right? It's like folks are out here in the sambas and wearing soccer jerseys, and like sports culture has really just kind of become intertwined with fashion in such a really wonderful way. And like we see that in the opening ceremony with so many designers that are involved in it. LVMH in the first place as a sponsor to all of the Olympics, right? Dior, dressing all of the performers and like that Lady Gaga piece that she was wearing. So like it's so deeply intertwined at this moment, and it's really interesting to see like how that has really taken off in different events, different mediums, different brands, and what that looks like. But it's fun. It's a fun time.
Yeah, I feel like the idea of like sports and fashion going hand in hand doesn't like quite maybe like occur at first thought. Where like why do we think that happens? I feel okay, let me back up a little bit. Like I think that like the Olympics, there's so much focus on like the athleticism that like I mean to a great extent, like if we go like all the way back to like ancient Rome, where like they were wearing nothing, to now it's still like when you're actively doing the sports and like performing, there is like a pretty significant like state of undress essentially. So like hold on, gathering a thought. However, when people aren't performing, when they're not performing incredible athletic feats, there is a lot of like fashion moments that happens. What's that intersection? Do you think it's just not just because, but like, fashion can be used as spectacle. We love to look at fashion. Is this like an opportunity to like play into that? Is there something that we're trying to communicate? What do you think it is?
Yeah. I mean, there's two things, right? You talked about spectacle, and like I think that's so important. I think that's why LVMH, for better or for worse, fits with this like this Olympics, I mean, obviously it's France and the fashion house is there, but like they fit because they are able to market spectacle, they're able to create spectacle. And I think that's really part of it, right? It's like that connection to, you know, we think about the opening ceremony and all of the countries coming in along the river, and like all of this moment, it like ties in, it feels like a fashion show, right? Like for me that really feels like a fashion show. And that's why like the opening ceremony was so interesting to see, you know, what designers are outfitting what countries, what that connection is, and also just thinking about like national identity and how that's being portrayed in fashion, right? Like that kind of gets to that other point of it, like why these are tied together, because there's so much nationalism in fashion. There's so much national identity that comes out in that. And so like going back to the opening ceremony, I think about a country like Bermuda, for example. Like Bermuda was out there in Bermuda shorts, right? It's like that is part of their national identity. How much of that are we leaning into for the opening ceremony? And I think what I find really interesting about all of those looks from that specific point in the competition is how much each country leans into that identity, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you think about Italy in Armani, but then you think about Canada in like Lululemon, and it's like there's nothing really being said there by that. And then you have countries like Mongolia or the Czech Republic who are out here wearing like things that really tie into national identity,
Mm-hmm.
traditional dress, for lack of a better term, but like, you know, stuff that's really tied into their history. And it's something I find really interesting as we look at the USA in particular. And I will say, I am one of the biggest fans of Ralph Lauren as one can be. You know, as someone who went to
Yes.
boarding school, as someone who grew up in New York City and hip hop culture being tied into that, love it. These
Yeah.
uniforms for the US for the opening ceremony look like people that would get stuffed in a locker in the mid 2000s. Or alternatively, folks in the same era go into the club in business casual. Like the blazer and the jeans, like that's
Yeah.
like early 2000s business casual in the club. Like there's a photo of LeBron in a very similar outfit 25 years ago that looks like what he was
Interesting.
wearing today. And it's fascinating to me that those are the two things there.
They also look a little bit like stuff that I've seen in like the costume designing Glee,
Mm,
the TV
yeah.
show. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Why? Okay, so if you're saying that, you know, that's that like weird preppy business casual vibe from like the 2000s, we talk a lot about the like fashion cycle and fashion being cyclical in fashion
Hmm.
studies and fashion history. Do you like, is that where that comes from? But like why this outfit? How do we feel about the outfit first, and then why this outfit? Because I feel like so many other countries like really like pulled out the stops in terms of design, and
Hmm.
then the US was like blazer and a pair of jeans, and I'm like, you're not wrong, especially for those who don't know, I'm joining today's show from the spare bedroom of my sister-in-law's house in Missouri, because my
Hmm.
husband and I are currently moving from the New York area to Illinois. And so I've been spending just a tiny bit of time in the Midwest, and will be spending the next 2 years in the Midwest. And everyone is either wearing like polos and cargo shorts, or like jeans and a blazer.
Yeah. There's a specific kind of Americanness to it, but I don't know. It's hard for me because we think about the cyclical nature of trends and fashion and all that. That's not a trend that's coming back, right? Like, you know, like
Yeah.
we're not in the club in blazers and jeans anymore. And like some of that association, I also think of like from the NBA and the dress codes that were going on at that point in time. In the NBA, so like because of that, a lot of the like black celebrities that we saw, when we saw them out like on courtside, if they weren't playing or anywhere else and like traveling to games, they were wearing jeans and a blazer, right? And I think that's because
Interesting.
like blazer was part of the dress code there. It was like there's some that kind of formal element of it. So I think that trickled down over time. But that's not something that's come back, right? Like we're real casual people now. I think
Hmm.
we've gotten away from blazers in so many contexts. So it was really interesting to me to like see that version of it and see kind of how that showed up. Because I'm like, yeah, I mean, like the question becomes like, what is American fashion, right? And like denim, deeply
Yeah,
American. So
I was
yes,
about to bring that up. Yes.
deeply American. but we could do something else. We could do something else. That's what I keep coming back to.
Let's talk a little bit more about like the denim thing though, because I think that it's so specific. You're so right that like generally speaking, America is very casual in terms of the way we dress. Maybe not in places like, I don't know, I can't even say Los Angeles because in Los Angeles, athletes are so popular, but maybe not in places like New York, which is a fashion capital, right? But like, um, jeans have had such an interesting history and are
Mm-hmm.
so, like you said, deeply intertwined in American history. But like, do people know of what that history looks like?
Oh God, no,
Because I
no,
don't
not
think
at all.
so.
And that's something that I think would be maybe cool, right? Because so many of the other countries had their pieces, their looks. They told a story as part of it, right? And like
Yeah.
that's something that I really love. It's like, what is the story that's being told here? Like I look at like South Sudan, and they have their all like black outfits. Haiti was wearing Stella Jean, I want to say, and those pieces had like elements of, oh, there's a Haitian artist I can't remember, but they had like an element of country things that were tied to the national identity of the country. Philip Dodard, that is the man's name. Um, they had elements of like his artwork in there. It was printed and produced on dead stock fabric, and so I think like there's so many elements of storytelling that could have been in there, and like like denim is part of the American story, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was that great documentary that Dr. Jonathan Square at Parsons, he like spoke about in there. He speaks about denim in fashion history. You could teach an entire fashion history class just on denim and what that has meant to the American history. But that's not what's happening when we see folks in the opening ceremony or out just hanging out in a denim and a blazer. Like most people aren't going to see that. They're going to
Right.
see 2000s LeBron, Tim Duncan, and baggy jeans and blazer, or whatever version of it. Right, your Midwest
Yeah.
uncle, like it's not the same. And I think that storytelling moment was missed a little bit, and especially from a
Yeah.
brand like RL that is like at the center of Americana. I feel like we could really tell that story to the masses in a beautiful way, and they are capable.
I think it was almost like, I think it was an attempt because I can see, given like Ralph Lauren's general aesthetic, which I know it's pronounced Ralph Lauren, I will never pronounce it that way.
Mhm.
Forgive me. I'm too American for it. Um, I can, like, given their general aesthetic, the business or like preppy New England kind of like vibe could have been what they
Mhm.
went for, but I think that that would have given the wrong impression. And so I
Mhm.
think the wrong impression of, I think, like elitism. I think that
Mhm.
they were attempting not to do that by using something so very American as jeans, but
Mhm.
I just don't think it hit the mark. And I also think that it kind of, given this like 2000s association that we're coming up with here, it makes America feel almost like dated, like
Yeah.
we're not like with the times, which I
Yeah.
mean, when you think about like America in terms of like our policy and our healthcare and our
Mm.
education, we're not with the
Yeah.
times. So
That
it's
is fair.
almost fitting in a way.
Yeah. No, it really is, and I think it's wow. No, that is beautiful to think about it as actually being like corresponding with where we're at, because it does feel in many ways policy wise and everything else that we are regressing in some ways, and so it's fitting. I don't know if the good folks at Ralph Lauren wanted that to be the ideal, but it does feel really feel fitting. But it's interesting because I think, and I can't speak to the design process, but I think what a lot of sports brands, a lot of like football, soccer teams across Europe, especially England, design wise, what they're reaching for is like late 90s, early 2000s. Like it is a lot of that energy in terms of like silhouettes and the cuts. Like this jersey, I think I want to say from the 2002 Olympics. And like that's the era that's really become popular. But I think understanding the language of what is popular and why feels important, and that
Yeah.
feels like that was where it missed the mark, because it's like, yeah, we're enjoying the like 2000s vibe of fashion and like 90s jerseys, the colors, all that, for like football fashion, but not with blazers and like baggy jeans. That's not quite it.
Yeah, and I think you're right with maybe they're picking up on the way that certain 2000s styles have been trending on social media, but being referential with your fashion choices like this one was trying, or at least I think was trying to do,
Hmm.
in that, like, vintage nostalgia cycle of fashion trending thing that happens in fashion, because there's always like a mainstream fashion and then like these trends are happening on a faster scale, in my personal opinion.
Hmm.
But anyways, being referential is dangerous, essentially.
Yeah,
Like, it's really hard to get it right.
yeah,
You can
and
overdo it, you can underdo it, you can just totally miss the mark. Like,
yeah, and it's interesting to, as we talk about trends, to see what trends show up that aren't like brand led. And like, it's such a big moment for so many brands to have this. Like, I think about like Telfar outfitting Liberia. Previously, you and I had talked about who was it in '92?
Supreme. Oh
No,
no,
not the
oh
skateboard
yes.
aside. Uh,
Yeah, one of the first. I think it's like, there's a Women's Wear Daily article that credits Issey Miyake as being one of the first
mhm.
designers to have outfitted an Olympics team in 1992.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yugoslavia, Bulgaria. I don't remember which one. But we think about these as really big fashion moments, and what like this might mean for a brand, what it might mean for a country being tied to it, like thinking about Sri Lanka's looks for this, the Czech Republic, all these countries. But what has been really interesting to me is seeing how the outside trends have come into the space, especially a space with like uniformity being really kind of front and center. So I think about
Mm-hmm.
like like track or gymnastics. What accessories are coming up in this? Like Sha'Carri Richardson kind of channeling FloJo with her nails, with the jewelry. Like, there's all these little elements. The grills, so many folks and grills, and it's so beautiful. Like watching, I think it was Suni Lee maybe, taking her gold medal with the girls, but so many others, right? Like, these moments that are part of like fashion trends outside of that are coming back in, even with the uniformity going on, and that's what I really
Mm-hmm.
find like the most interesting.
Have we seen such individual expression in the Olympics before? Because I even
Oh.
remember watching them this time around and being like pleasantly surprised at how many athletes had very visible tattoos. Because
Mm.
I feel like that's also something, I mean, like, tattoos are, some people may call them art, but still bodily adornment, which is a type
Hmm.
of fashion. And there's trends in tattoos, so they're fashion. I don't have to justify it. But,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'm just like noticing this like more individuality being expressed in the Olympics, when it seems like previously it was really dedicated to being like a like not nation making, but definitely like national identity
Hmm.
project.
Yeah. And I would say certain events would have had more individual expression. Like, I think about track, especially, right? Like, again, you've got FloJo being at the like front end of that, of being someone who like really was one of the first people to like actually bring fashion onto the track in that way. So track's had that since about the '80s. You've always seen. I think there's a brashness about track. I also say this as someone who ran track in college, but there is a brashness that's connected. And then you think about folks like Noah Lyles, who was the 100 meter for the sprints. Uh, he he has that personality, and I think because there's so much more personality being shown previously, and part of that I kind of attribute to TikTok, really, like in social media, kind of blowing up, that people can be the truest version of themselves. They can be the version of themselves that also, like, if it's not true, will maybe sell the best in some ways. And so I think there's just a lot more like individual expression because there's more outlets to express themselves individually. But I also think about like basketball, for example, like there's still been those individual elements of expression. So really, I feel like it depends on the sport.
Gotcha. Well, it does make sense that you say it depends on the sport, especially because there were some rather like non-traditional sports in the Olympics this year. I think skateboarding was first in the Olympics in 20
I
in
think
2020.
2021, the last one. Yeah.
Yeah,
So the
in the last
2020,
one.
but like I moved over. Yeah.
Right, right. So in the last Olympics, and I mean, first of all, like I said, that's like a relatively non-traditional sport to have
Mm-hmm.
included in something like the Olympics. But also, as far as I understand, skating and skating culture, it's like the antithesis to uniformity. Like,
Mm-hmm.
think about skateboarders and like what comes to mind. It's like individual expression, it's subculture, it's counterculture. It's also like not so focused. I we were talking about this earlier, like why aren't there so many brands present when it comes to sponsorships or even the clothes
Mm-hmm.
that people are wearing in the skateboarding competitions? When it seems like, we have what we established at the beginning of the episode, which is like this spectacle moment, which fashion brands love to
Mm-hmm.
capitalize off of, just being frank with my words.
Yeah.
So why
It's
wasn't that
capitalism.
present? It is. Why wasn't that present in skateboarding? Because there it's a lot more dependent on people's individual style and like style
Yeah.
choices rather than like something being provided for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me, even like staying within skateboarding, right? Like because as we talked about, there are large skatewear brands that are not participating in this, despite it being one of the biggest moments of the decade, right? And like as we think about this fashion and sports being intertwined, it's interesting to me that some of those large skatewear brands are not part of this. Like if we think about Supreme and Palace, both of who have done collaborations with outside of their industry, outside within even within football, I think about Palace and the collaborations that they have. It has been really interesting to me to see that like they weren't involved in this. And I think as you said, it does speak to part of that like counterculture element, right? And it's like very anti-establishment. There's like nothing really more establishment than the Olympics, right? And like
Right.
especially like the national identity that is tied to it, the nationalism that's tied to it. So in some ways it makes sense, right? It's like why are we going to outfit this when like these folks care more about what's going on kind of locally, as you talked about what's going on in Thrasher magazine. Like it's a very different space, and I think that I still, even with it, I still find it fascinating because like Supreme loves making noise, Palace loves making noise, they love doing loud things, and like what's louder than the Olympics?
I will say though, just perhaps speculating on some reasons. I have not watched any of the men's skateboarding events. I've only watched the women's, and there was only one person who was over the age of 18 who competed.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's also some like age and like labor law limits or something
Mm.
along those lines when it comes to sponsoring. But there is another article in High Snobiety. I can never say that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's a
which
mouthful.
talks about like the non-uniformity of skateboarding and skateboarder style, and talking
Mm-hmm.
about like a large fact of that, the non-uniformity and the fact like the non-sponsorship is the fact that it's more about like your ability to style yourself as a skater
Mm.
rather than adhere to trends.
Yeah.
So I think that also plays into it. I wonder how much of like being able to style yourself. I'm this is tangenting. I'm sorry. I started
We love it.
skateboarding recently, so I'm like thinking way too much about it. I skateboarded as a teenager, and I have way too much time on my hands post grad, so I'm trying to get into some hobbies. But I wonder
Katie
like
also has a bruise to show for this as well.
I do. It's kind of going away now, but I fell on my elbow. I literally said to my husband, the only thing I'm afraid of with skateboarding is falling and breaking an elbow. Like I'm not too afraid of like breaking anything else, but an elbow is the one I do not want to break. And then I fell on my elbow. So I'm wearing pads now, but
there you go.
anyways, I'm curious about how much your kind of like legitimacy as a skater, maybe not necessarily as like an athlete or an Olympian, but like you and your belonging to the subculture of skating depends on your ability to like interpret some type of style for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such a great space to do that as well, because it is so like led by individual expression. And it's something, again, as a sport without uniforms, is very different than, like, I think about, like, the women's soccer team, because, again, just with fresh top of mind here, um, how little you can really express your individual style aside from the accessories. So there's like a couple players who wore a leg sleeve as like a little accessory, and like even that as a trend, right, is really fascinating because like that kind of took off because of one of the women on the women's basketball team, Asia Wilson, I want to say, I believe it's Wilson's last name. She always every game for the last few years, long leg sleeve, just one. And so what we've seen is like how that translates to other sports, and like some of the women's soccer team were talking about it. They were like, yeah, no, we just love Asia. We love the way Asia plays, and so we're gonna adopt this for this time. And like that's actually been really interesting to see, like across sports, across countries, what trends kind of pop out on their own just from these people being around one another. Like it's like been really interesting because like I do wonder coming into it, like how many folks would have like had the Olympic jewelry, had the grills, if there wasn't just like if they didn't see one another in this moment, right? And especially thinking about like the Olympic trials, and there's so much like that's part of it that goes into it as like a style thing. And in those, especially in those sports where there's such little like individual expression, and yeah, it's been fascinating to see how the folks come together. Do you have any favorite moments? What are your favorite fashion moments that we want to get into here?
I was actually going to ask if we could get a little bit more into the idea of national identity before we
Oh,
moved on, if that's
love it.
okay with you.
Let's do it.
Okay. I recently came across an image posted by the Dressed History podcast. Shout out to them. They're an incredible podcast. I recommend listening if you haven't already.
Mm-hmm.
And they had posted an image of the 1920s Olympics. And one of the things that I was wondering about as we were like, writing down our thoughts was we saw that in 1992 is when Miyake, dressed Team Lithuania. And that is like considered like the marking point when like designers enter the scene in Olympic fashion history, or I guess maybe even like how the Olympics like came online as a mainstream fashion event in a way. But I was wondering, as far as like representing your nation and like outfitting your body in like the colors or the imagery or the symbols of a nation, how far back in the Olympics that goes. Because obviously the entirety of the Olympics has been, athletes from different countries coming together to compete, right? And, there's something to be said about like the goodness, I suppose, of your country, depending on how well you perform as an athlete. So this, anyways, I'm getting so off track. I do not tell stories in a linear fashion. This, how long have we been putting like flags on our bodies at the Olympics, essentially? And I came across that image by Dressed History of a woman, really a girl, she was in her teens, in the 1920s, wearing her sportswear uniform, which at the time was like a long cardigan and a pleated skirt, with a little badge on the cardigan with the American flag. Additionally, I think it was either the 1920 or the 1924 Olympics, an image of a team from Mexico who had taken an image before they traveled to where the Olympics were that year. And they were dressed in like, national costume, as well as like holding up flags behind the athletes who are posing for the photo, and then having a slash across their shirts that said the name of their country on it. And I've just like, I've been thinking, I don't know why this thought has been coming up for me so much, but what really struck me in that idea of like representing country and national identity was specifically the rhythmic gymnastics leotards. Not just because they're beautiful, because they are, but not everybody did this. But I'd say like the first 5 competitors, they had beautifully designed leotards, and in that design, regardless of whether or not the colors matched the flag, they had little flags on their hips that were bedazzled in like Swarovski crystals. And
Mm.
I don't know why that like stuck in my brain so much. One of the reasons why we continue to do that is because it makes it easy to tell who is competing from what country.
Hmm.
But with the rhythmic gymnastics, there's something about like the flags being on their leotards and being bedazzled in like
Mm.
crystals that is like
Yeah.
so stuck in my head. Because like, take regular gymnastics, usually the leotards are just in the colors of the country, right?
Hmm.
It's specifically having the flag incorporated into your costume that way that was really, it's just sticking in my brain, and I don't know
Yeah.
why.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting, right? Because like it's such a specific way to showcase national identity, right? Like, and it speaks to the needs or the it speaks to the needs of that event, right? It's like you want to have something that like speaks to what is the vibe of that specific form of gymnastics, right? So it is very like glitzy. There's some glamour to it, and I think what I also find interesting is like the kind of like gender interplay that is involved in that as well. I don't know
Yeah.
if there's a men's version of that sport. I have no idea. I'm very
I didn't see
curious.
any male competitors, so
Yeah. So I would love to see what that would look like for those uniforms. It actually also reminds me of like the debate that happened when Nike released their uniforms, and there was kind of an uproar on the internet about like the track side of things and volleyball to some degree as well, uh, because the uniform itself was like not when they put it on a mannequin, it did not look like it was designed for any woman's body. It was
mm.
like the bikini was just like too small in places where it probably shouldn't be. And so there was this uproar about it of like, how are women supposed to compete in this if they're worried about presentation and all of this stuff? And it was actually really interesting because then a lot of the athletes were like, well, actually, Nike did work with us on a lot of this. They just put it on a bad mannequin. Like, and it was
Ah,
this conversation about like the needs of the athlete balancing out with the aesthetics of their events or the aesthetic choices of the brand in particular. And so it was just this like really interesting tension that came up about it. That I also find interesting as it goes sport by sport, because you will see like different brands sponsoring different countries in different sports. Like our volleyball sponsor, I think for men's volleyball is different than our like the overall sponsor. And there's just like there's so many of these little like needs that pop up and like allow these brands and allow the countries to showcase their national identity in like such different ways.
thank you for like clarifying that for my brain, because I
Of
was like,
course.
why am I so bothered by this?
But
Yeah, I
it's
did.
as we go ahead.
I did put down in my notes, I said like form versus function versus question mark.
No.
And that I think that
And
question
that's what
mark
we
is
talked about.
like addressing the needs of the specific event.
Yeah, that I love that was your note, because I filled that question mark so perfectly there.
You absolutely did. And speaking of the rhythmic gymnastics leotards specifically, like I know that the like brands who have designed for teams also have done some of the designs for things like gymnastics and a couple of the rhythmic gymnastics leotards. But especially for the smaller countries, there doesn't seem to be a lot of information about who is designing and who is making these costumes. And so
Hmm.
I am really curious. I don't have an answer for it, but it's just something I'm thinking about. And I'd love the audience, our listeners, to think about too, is like we have these brands, these really big brands whose names are present in something like the Olympics, but the brand isn't the designer. You know, a brand or a
Hmm.
design house usually has like a team of designers, and we never really get to know what their names are, who they
Hmm.
are as people. And I'm also really curious about who's making the uniforms and the
Hmm.
costumes. Where are they being manufactured, right? Essentially, like thinking about that like labor side of fashion in the Olympics. And then furthermore, I'm also blown away by the cost of some of them, especially
Hmm.
for artistic swimming. They can cost like upwards of $1,000 for each
What is in
suit.
them? What do you mean? How? What? Sorry, I wasn't
uh,
ready for that.
well, especially artistic swimming because they have to be waterproof. So I suspect that like the bedazzling, that's the wrong word
uh,
to use, but like they might not be glued on, they might be sewn on, which takes
that makes
more
sense.
effort,
The
right?
labor, yeah.
And then what happens to these costumes and these uniforms after the competition is another question I have.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
And that's why I think I was really excited to see what Haiti was doing, right? Like their opening ceremony outfit portrayed national identity in a beautiful way, but it was made on dead stock fabric, right? It's like we are missing opportunities to have a discussion in sustainability in these moments, because I'll say it myself as someone who like works in sustainable fashion. The Olympics come on again, I just like blackout. I don't care about the sustainability side. I don't even think about it. It's like, ooh, look at that little fun piece there. Like, I'm not even thinking about how that garment is made. And like, that's all I think about. That's all I think about for the rest of the year is like, what is the garment? What is the end of life cycle for this? And like, because it's the Olympics, it's like, well, we don't really have to think about this. But we should. We should be thinking about this. We should be thinking about like, what is the cost of this? What is the labor cost of this? What is the cost for the environment? And it's hard to kind of square those things away, especially because this event is supposed to be in many ways a celebration, or as we talk about like spectacle as well. What does it mean when we have a celebration or a spectacle and it's not necessarily like practicing sustainability? Like I think about what was that, red carpet green dress, like all these organizations that like put out the focus to like rewear things on the red carpet or like practice more sustainability, like moments at the Met Gala of people wearing like similar things over time. Like whenever we get into these large spectacle type moments, we lose this kind of like thread of sustainability and like waste diversion and all that, because it's like, oh, it's for a special occasion, so let's get this out here for that.
Which is like a little unfortunate, because the Olympics is so global that what an opportunity there would be to have a bit of like a cultural impact on like consumer behavior, as well as like a push for policy. I think that would be like a really, I feel like more people should be wanting to say like, hey, look, this is made from recycled fabrics, or the dead stock fabrics from with Haiti. Like, I feel like that it's such a conversation in the fashion world at large. I was going to say fashion industry, but I think that they would rather sidestep that conversation. But, you know, it's something the fashion industry is brought to task for over. So it feels odd that in like such a big global moment, and especially because the fashion industry is very impactful globally and does impact a lot of the smaller countries that were present, you'd think it'd be a bit more of a conversation.
Yeah, and there were a couple of moments of conversation that were mostly forced by like outside folks. I can't remember what organization, but they did a direct action, I want to say the first or second day of the Olympics, where like Nike has a large billboard, I want to say in Paris maybe, and they walked through with signs in order to like block some of the imagery, and were protesting, I think, the wages not being paid to garment workers. I'm not sure what it was, but like that is whatever it is, and we'll put this in the show notes. Whatever, that was the only time I heard of any kind of protest, really. And I find that actually kind of interesting as we think about like the role of protest and politics in French society and their willingness to protest. How little of that we actually ended up getting, because the talk of it going into it was like, are we going to get strikes? Are we going to get protests? What is the labor movement going to do for this? And like, in the end, everyone's just like, woo, I love my country. And like, we kind of forget about that, right? Like we forget about the actual like impact of all of these things.
Yeah. Interesting. Perhaps it's on purpose, is my conspiracy theory.
I mean, like, honestly, it's a great distraction, right? And
it is.
I think that's why like LVMH like has this opportunity, because they have this like collection of brands, and they have this like their finger on the pulse, and they have this moment. There's a lot of things in their supply chain. There's a lot of issues, human rights stuff that we have some questions over. No one's talking about it.
Yeah.
A lot of people are talking about how the torch was brought out in a Louis Vuitton trunk, or like Lady Gaga and Dior. Like we just forget about that. And, you know, we will for a little bit, because that is the power of spectacle, the power of a moment.
And that's also the fun of fashion, I'd say. And speaking of fun,
yes,
let's round things off, maybe not on a bummer note. So,
oh, good. I love this. There have been so many favorite moments. that I am so excited to talk about. One of them, off the bat,
Hmm.
the Olympic shooting, folks.
Yes.
The
Oh my
outfits that
gosh.
people are wearing in
I'm
there.
so surprised that didn't come up earlier.
Oh, I tucked it away. I'd been waiting for it because there's great fashion moments on either end of the on either end of the spectrum. So you had the woman who won gold from South Korea, who is wearing just the swaggiest outfit. I don't even know how else to describe it. Like she just in all black
Decked
looked
out
like
with the,
she was, oh my god, and she had her like
yeah,
daughter's little thing on there and all
she's
black.
so
She won the
sweet.
gold. It's so sweet and such a contrast because she looked just like a cold killer is the best way. Like she looked like a hitman, a gender neutral hitman. And then speaking of hitman, Turkey, I'm positive, and by positive I mean allegedly. I don't want to get sued, but like the man that Turkey sent out here, no glasses, no equipment, hand in pocket, pulled
And took
up,
away
ready to
silver,
shoot.
right?
Yeah, got the shooter,
Yeah.
got the silver. What I tried to say was we did not.
Little Freudian slip there.
I was going to say shooters shoot, and it went elsewhere. But no, that man is a shooter, and he shoots, and it was really beautiful to see that range of things. Yusuf something from Turkey. Shouts out
Yes.
to that man. He killed it. But yeah, that was one of
Yeah.
my favorite moments. The grills, folks out here in grills, seeing black folks express individualism and their individual identity in a space with uniforms as well. Like that had been really powerful. And seeing Simone Biles in her like goat chain, that like diamond encrusted goat pendant, it's like, yes, girl, you are. Lean into this. You are the goat. Lean in.
I think another really cool thing about that though is that like elements of black culture are being celebrated in the media in the Olympics
Hmm.
right now, when I feel like expressions of individuality outside of that like national identity dressed in the
Hmm.
opening of the games is
Yeah.
usually like highly discouraged in the
Yeah.
media. That's been like a big change. So it's exciting that like the media response to it has also been positive.
Yeah. And that's been really interesting because like I think about, and this is not just in the United States, I think about this also like in France and England recently, in like the World Cup and large soccer tournaments, is that when black folks are on these teams and they are succeeding, that is when blackness is really celebrated, right? Like we have these moments where, I think about Sha'Carri Richardson in particular, like the way that she's celebrated now is very different because, and I think years ago it would have been like, oh, the nails are ghetto or whatever the language might have been around that, right? And I think that
Yeah.
shift has kind of happened, but I also think it's because of like performance based, right? Like because she's doing well,
Mm.
that's what we're getting. Because I think on the other side of that, like France and England and some of the recent like larger soccer continental soccer tournaments, when things went awry, they were the center, they were the focus there, and it was like racial abuse immediately. I think about the
Gotcha.
2022 World Cup with England, and when some of the black players missed the penalty kicks that they had, it was immediate racial abuse. But the day before, they are celebrated, right? Like it's
Mm.
this dichotomy of when blackness is actually like appreciated.
Yeah. I hadn't made that connection, so thank you for pointing it out.
Yeah, it is really, and it's interesting to see because the other side of that also is like Snoop Dogg out here living his best life in this side quest. And if you would have told me when I was a young child in the late '90s that this man would be out here with Martha Stewart, my queen, and just doing everything at the Olympics, I would have never believed you.
Um, I still don't really believe it, and I still don't know why they were there. Can someone
uh,
explain that to me? I just know that they were, and something about it felt so right
mhm.
so that I didn't question it. But now I'm like, actually, why?
Yeah, I think it was the last Olympics. Snoop Dogg was just doing like casual commentary, and the
Uh
internet
huh.
loved it. The internet loved it, and so they were like, "Well,
Gotcha.
let's send him out here," and the internet still loves it. And so it makes sense for Martha Stewart to be out there. I feel like she owns like 6,000 horses. Like that woman looks like
Does
she.
she?
I don't know. She seems
Oh,
like a
you say
horse
she
girl.
looks like. Okay, okay. I
She
see what you're
seems
saying.
like
Yeah.
she owns peacocks. Like she's a horse girly for sure. And so it makes sense for her to be there, right? Like, I'm sure she knows what's going on with dressage and the other two that I can never remember that you will have to remind me of. But seeing them in like full riding gear out there in
Yeah.
Paris was just beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Which, like, the fashion specificities of the equestrian world is like a whole nother thing. Um, but like the most recognizable of that is the dressage outfit, which is apparently called a shad belly. That coat, it's called a shad belly.
Of course it is. I want to know the etymology of it. I hope someone
So do
listening
I.
will know.
But like if you're gonna like be making like this like have this pop culture moment, like that would be the outfit to wear. Interestingly though, the
Mm-hmm.
dressage outfit, they used to wear top hats for the
Oh,
competition, but they're not allowed to wear top hats anymore. They have to wear helmets. Which, sorry,
probably
side note,
smart.
I know we're talking about like our favorite moments, but something that absolutely drove me nuts
Mm.
about watching this skateboarding was like,
Yep.
why is there nobody here like telling these teenagers to tighten their chin straps? Because like they're like, what are the regulations around that? Because they were wearing their chin straps like down to their collarbone, and I was like, you're like 16, you're gonna get like a TBI. Like,
As someone who has had a concussion, has had several concussions, and had a concussion fairly recently in the middle of the semester, I'm out here gonna, bang the drum on proper brain protection. But this does feel
yeah.
like both of us having old man yells at clouds energy here. The
Yeah, I was in the car with my husband earlier where
youth.
he was driving a Tesla and he was complaining about like the way that the mirrors work, and I go, "You're starting to sound like an old man, honey." But
But no, I'm
yeah,
with you.
sorry.
They should have had a helmet on,
They should have.
like a helmet
But yeah,
tucked in there.
back to the favorite moments. I did
Mm-hmm.
very much enjoy the Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg, especially because my mom is an equestrian, so I got to like ask her questions about equestrian fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked her, what would you want a broad audience to know about the idea of fashion and equestrian sports? And she gave me a really interesting response.
Mm-hmm.
She said that equestrians generally also struggle with body shape and inclusivity because, especially, there was a point in time in the Olympics when women started outperforming men in
Mm-hmm.
equestrian events, especially in cross country. That's the one
Mm-hmm.
where you're like riding across the country and jumping those big fences that look like hedges. Um, and so they I don't know if it was like they averaged everyone's weights or something like that, but the women weighed less than the men, so the horses could run faster. So
Makes sense.
because they were carrying less weight, so they started making women carry like sandbags on their saddles when they did cross country to like make it quote unquote even.
Yikes.
Yeah, they don't do
Is
that anymore, but
That's
at
good.
least I don't think they do. But she also wanted us to know that fashion includes the horse. So the
Ah.
color of your saddle pads, the bonnets that they wear, the color of their leg wraps. Like my mom, when she was a competitive rider, she would wear she would have the saddle pad, the leg wraps, and her helmet would all have like matching colors,
Mm.
and that like wasn't a thing in the 70s and 80s when she was doing it, but now that's definitely like a part of equestrian fashion. um
Oh.
and especially in dressage is like the bougie, horse sport. My mom says that there's a meme called the dressage queen, which is the
Mm.
shad belly, which is the black jacket, the bright white tights, and red lipstick.
Mm.
And the bridle that the horses wear, often they have a called a brow band. It goes across their brow, and it's usually like encrusted with like little crystals and
Mm.
all that good stuff. So,
Of course.
and there's sometimes embroidery or even like, in like the 18th century, 17th, yeah, no, 18th century French, like roba la française, whatever, roba française,
Mm-hmm.
court dresses where they have like the like ribbon that goes down the front.
Mm-hmm.
They put that on horse saddles too.
Nah, that feels
So
right though. That does.
yeah,
And but one of my, as we talk about, dressage and kind of the like very elitist energy of that,
yeah,
what I have found to be, again, another favorite as we go back to Snoop and Martha, Snoop Dogg crip walking with one of the dressage horses.
I saw that.
Like,
it's so fun.
That context, like the recontextualization of that, just bringing those worlds together is truly incredible. And that I think is my favorite, because that is how it started. Like previously, Snoop Dogg was watching dressage, I think it was 2021, and he was like, oh, that horse is crip walking. And now here we are. He's crip walking with the horse. And that's America. That's America for you.
I also, in terms of favorite moments, that is so beautifully American. I'm sorry, I just got distracted by that. It's where else would something that chaotic happen?
It is. It really is. It's beautiful.
So other favorite moments for me, I finally got to experience a little bit of football culture, and not American football, soccer, and because I've never really watched a game, and I was watching one of the games because we were just watching the Olympics. The drama. Oh my god. One of the goalies, someone touched her foot and she threw herself on the ground, gripping her knee, and then as soon as the camera panned away, she just jumped back up again and got back to playing. And I was like, what's happening here?
Oh, I love it. It is one of my favorite things. And it's funny because I follow almost every country's football in some way, but it's something that comes up in the UK a lot. My team is Liverpool, and you see a lot of folks in the UK who, maybe might have spent the last few days out on the streets at the urging of Tommy Robinson, being a little nationalist, EDL-esque folks who are complaining so deeply about the drama in the sports and the flopping and all of that, because it's not traditionally associated with the English way of playing football. And so it's so fascinating to me because I love it. Be a drama queen. Give me more. Flop on the floor. Roll.
It's hilarious.
Keep rolling. This is so silly. You barely got touched. I love this. But it's something that's so divisive in the UK, divisive with the folks who you think it would be. Again, folks who are very, very pro EDL, who have been out here not being the best version of themselves. Anyway.
Yeah. No. And then I think my last favorite moment, and I have to bring it up, I'm so sorry, was the Australian breakdancer. And I don't want to be mean. We almost went this
whole thing without forgetting this, without talking about this.
I know. I had to bring it up at the very end. I don't want to be mean. I also haven't watched the breakdancing yet because I was saving to watch the whole thing. I could sit down and pay attention to it, but I've just seen too many memes of it on the internet to escape it. So we have to talk about it.
It felt like performance art. It also felt like a really great example of academia versus the actual world. And so this woman, Ray Gun, I can't even watch it, but we're gonna clip it up. We'll put it out here when we put this out.
Oh my god.
It makes me so uncomfortable.
We need some clarification. She is a professor, right?
She has her PhD in breakdancing, it seems.
And she's actually a professor.
Yeah. But she is not actually a breakdancer. We will say that, and that is very clear. I'm sure Ray Gun, I think, is her name. It's fascinating. It is one of those things, it feels like Napoleon Dynamite. It feels like...
Yeah, satire.
Yes, you could not write a better script for satire, but I don't think it is, and so I'm just deeply uncomfortable, while also welcoming the moments of the internet that we have at this stage. To do that at the Olympics is just...
I don't understand. A part of me is so in denial that I still think that it might be satire.
I hope.
Do you know what I mean? But one thing I did notice from the little that I've seen is that of all things where you think there wouldn't be uniformity, they were wearing
Mm-hmm.
uniforms in the
Yeah.
breakdancing competition.
Yeah.
That's fascinating, which I think like I still kind of question the idea of like skateboarding being in the Olympics, just like given its nature that we
Mm-hmm.
discussed being like anti-establishment. That
Yeah.
like it seemed like they like left them to organize it themselves, which is
Mm-hmm.
exactly what it felt like. Like if you see like the stadiums and the way that like everything, and I'm not gonna say everything looked thrown together, but it wasn't like polished like the
Yeah.
gymnastics was, right? So I think that like they left them to organize themselves, and Tony Hawk was even there, so like it felt genuine enough, right?
Yeah.
Versus like the breakdancing, which felt like, or did they feel like obligated to like have it there? Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
what was it just didn't feel right.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm so curious, and I haven't done any of the research on it, but like, what is the connection between France and breakdancing that they chose to put this event in there this year, right?
No
Like,
idea.
I don't get it. I don't know if they're like, maybe someone French knows about France's connection to breakdancing, but it didn't feel like it fit. It also felt kind of like a missed opportunity because, like, each sport will have someone come out and like do the opening like thing for it, where they like bang the stick 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
They had Snoop Dogg do that again because this man's out here completing all the side quests. But like, what is Snoop Dogg's connection to breakdancing? Really, if you think about it, it's like not. He doesn't really have one other than like him being a rapper, I guess. But like,
Yeah.
breakdancing, historically from New York City started here. And so, it would make more sense to like have an East Coast rapper, have
Yeah.
a former B-boy, B-girl come out here and like bang the stick. So it did feel just kind of like thrown together, which I don't understand why,
Yeah.
because it was their choice to put it in the Olympics.
Yeah. I mean, it would make more sense when the Olympics are in Los Angeles not next year, in 4 years. I'm like, I can see
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah.
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 So
It was fascinating.
I'm just like really enjoying all of the fun that the internet is having with that moment. I was gonna say I feel bad for her, but do I? She went out there
No.
in full confidence. I think another thing is somebody pointed out that like that smirk that she has on her face, like I think she knows that she's like mocking it in a
He
way.
has to be in on the joke. There's no way.
I can't imagine that. Anyways, like
Yeah. I wish there was a fashion moment in it. It's not. It's just pure absurdity, and I love it, and that's the joy of the Olympics. It really is.
I was able to pull that one connection out of the fashion thing there, because
You
like
were.
it feels like that
It's
would
better
be
than
the
me.
place to like have like your own style, especially like breakdance feels like one of those things where you would have such a personal style of dancing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't the fashion be really important to that?
No,
The whole
you
thing
would
was
think.
wrong.
Yeah, I don't know, but I'm glad it's the last of the events because that can be a lingering memory, while
Yeah.
also like moving on to like the finals of a lot of other things. Like we got basketball going on right now. We got all these other things, and it's like a nice little footnote that we got at the end to kind of just like put the bow on this fantastic couple of weeks here.
I've always been curious why ballet is not in the Olympics, but then I figured it out the other day.
What is it?
Because the ballet world is so extremely elitist that they would never deign to compete in the Olympics. At least that's my perception of it. They have their own competitions, like do most of these sports, because otherwise how would you qualify? But I digress. I just think that they're too snobby for it. But
that would be fair. Well, maybe LA. Let's start lobbying some folks. Let's get LA in the Olympics in 2028. Is that when that is?
Yeah, 2028. That feels weird to say.
Yeah, that does.
We'll be alive for that. Ugh.
Well, hopefully. Let's see what the planet's doing. On that note,
how your partying's doing.
Yeah, my liver, really. It's been a summer of outside. The Olympics don't help. I just want to like frolic around. I'm watching people be like sporting and whatnot. I'm like, yeah, I can do that. And then meanwhile, the last time I was sporting was college, and now my only sport is going to Elsewhere in the rooftop.
Why do you think I dropped $200 on a skateboard? Yeah.
It's a fun time, though.
It is. But on that note, I think I'm going to go be outside and ride my skateboard.
Enjoy. I'm going to
Thank you.
Honestly possibly go to Elsewhere. Shouts out to Elsewhere one more time. Shouts out to Grills. God, the grills were so good.
But yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap it.
Yeah.
Rap, get it? Because
Boo!
I deserve that one. All right. That's it. That's it for us, folks. I'm not going to talk anymore because it's just going to get worse from here. Thank you so much for listening. As always, anything that we've mentioned will be in the show notes. This was a fun one.
It was. We'll have some fun ones throughout this. We'll mix it up. You know, it won't just be serious fashion dialogue. It will be, even in the fun ones. But this was especially fun.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Go US. Make America great again.